Welcome to the Time for a Reset podcast, the podcast where I, Paul Frampton, interview senior marketers on the big issues of the day and the thing that they want to see reset with an ever-changing landscape. Welcome back to another episode of Time for a Reset. This afternoon, I'm delighted to welcome Brandon Keenan to Time for a Reset. Brandon's currently the Chief Marketing Officer for Ziglu, and Ziglu is a new challenger bank that's challenging the challenger banks that obviously originally challenged the banks in the early days. So it's a banking exchange investment app at the kind of forefront of crypto and crypto wallets. And Ziglu and Brandon have been kind of together for 6 or so months already. Prior to that, Brandon was CMO of Antstream Arcade. And prior to that, he had a very kind of illustrious and diverse career on the publisher side, working for a lot of big global media owners that include CNN, AOL, Buzzfeed. So what Brandon brings to the table is having looked at that side of the market and the understanding of the commercial side of what brands look for from media owners and technology and content. Now, actually having been on the marketeer side for 4 or 5 years, he takes a very different view but is able to very smartly be able to think about what value he sees in media owners and agencies. So I think it's going to be a really interesting conversation because Brandon has a really kind of diverse and different background to some of the marketers we talk to. So welcome, Brandon.
Hey, Paul. Thanks for having me.
Delighted to have you.
I'd say on that, it's probably safe to say commercial ad sales guys don't like to negotiate with me now because I know both sides.
I can imagine. Yes, I can imagine. Yeah, when you phone up and say, so what I want you to do is this, and they're like, we don't do that, you know that. I'm like, yeah, I know you can. So we always start with the same question, Brandon, which is if there was a big red button on the desk and you could hit reset on something in marketing, what would that be?
Yeah, I think there's a handful of them, but I would say the two things. One more for marketers is simplification of tools, simplification of marketing, and of what we do. And I think we've spent maybe a decade or so overcomplicating things to carve out really finite niches in the space, which just adds layers of complexity. And then the question is whether we need it or not. And that kind of evolves into transparency. So having all these complex solutions to problems that we're not even sure whether we have or not, and then being transparent about it. And then being able, and then transparency kind of is a whole spectrum of transparency in marketing, transparency with vendors, also transparency with customers, and ultimately, that goal of total visibility, which may or may not be a myth, but that's what the holy grail we're trying to achieve.
Nice. I like that. Kind of feels like the golden circle all the way from the customer through the brand, through the agencies or service providers that service it, and then all of the suppliers that actually are bought from. Like, how do you actually kind of get a line of sight and transparency and visibility across all of that? I think, as you say, is that possible? Are you ever going to get to a place where you feel like you've got to complete transparency and truth in an industry that is about storytelling?
Yeah, I mean, storytelling is one thing. I think storytelling is how you tell your brand story to consumers, and I think you always have to be authentic and transparent in the story you tell. I think I don't think it'll ever work out well for a brand if they tell a story that they end up not being able to deliver that story. Storytelling shouldn't really exist in like ad tech. I think. I mean, and sadly it does. The story and how you position it and how you position that, but you often find yourself kind of looking at 3 or 4 different pieces of ad tech, and nobody will say we're exactly like them or exactly like them, because everybody, well, we do this to the story. And then you, as a marketer, you have to kind of decipher and break down the story and deconstruct it and find out what they're actually saying. And I think
everyone's got proprietary technology and proprietary algorithms, haven't they, and AI.
Yeah, I mean, everybody has something. And I think a lot of times, if you really do deconstruct the story and you can get that out, you find out what they're doing and you go, okay, this is useful. But then it gives you the ability to compare it and then decide if it's useful and what you want, as opposed to this is useful, find out later that maybe it wasn't as useful as the story was. So yeah, so that transparency piece is important. So yeah, so I think storytelling on marketing on the brand side is very different than storytelling on the tech side. I think the other holy grail, I mean, we've been trying to solve attribution as the holy grail, with evil forces against us constantly. So it's just this, I think as marketers, it's that the definition of hope. I mean, we're all hopeful that we will find transparency and find attribution, but the question is, will we ever? And the answer is probably not, to be honest. That's the challenge. But what we want to do is get as close as we can to it, so we can make decisions that are feasible and worthwhile.
Right, and I guess with marketing, you're trying to get to the least wrong view, aren't you? Because when you're dealing with consumers and human behavior, they don't always behave completely predictably. In the last podcast, I was chatting to Rory, and Rory Sutherland, that is, and he was saying the problem is that you can't predict things in the long term just using data, because data is only about the past. It doesn't actually tell you about the future. Now, if we were talking to Google and Facebook and Amazon, they would probably completely contest that view, and maybe they're slightly at odds with each other. But I think there's some truth about you can predict behavior based on intent in the short term, but then COVID comes along, and suddenly everyone's behavior's changed, and then that data's thrown out. So how do you kind of internally kind of talk about attribution and trying to get the board, I guess, and investors to realize that you're going to get as close as possible to what's working, but you're never going to get to kind of being able to align every single pound to value?
Yeah, I think it's been detrimental. The myth that was created in digital marketing, and I included, was part of that myth. I mean, back, ad.com days, we were talking about digital being the future, because you can measure everything. And they, there was always these marketers are funny, because you go to conferences, there's always like a 2 or 3 year trend of the same kind of topic. I mean, we had the big data topic, and then we had the digital measurement topic, and then obviously, remember, it was like 10 years, this is the year of mobile, and finally it was. And so, and there was also a lot of converse going, linear TV or TV is dead and radio's dead. Why would you do that? I'm not doing anything if you can't measure it. And so all of a sudden we created this impression at board level of people who don't necessarily work in marketing day to day. They just go, you know what? I expect full digital measurement. Right. And so every pound, and there used to be a time that if you spent, you could get a 6x return on Google search, for example. Whatever you spend, you get 6x return. That doesn't exist anymore. But I think the myth is still there. They're like, we want marketers that can measure everything, and we don't want to waste one penny. And I think and from a digital marketing standpoint, and again, I was a quote unquote digital marketing person, and to me now that's a funny term. I don't think anyone should be digital marketing people. I think that has shifted completely. You're just either a marketer or you're not a marketer, and I find it hard. There's no way to say, well, that marketer doesn't know anything about digital. You're not a marketer if you don't do digital. So that whole digital thing, but we are still at Wanamaker's quote, 51% of the money, we still don't know where it goes. We just don't know which half. And that's still a problem. I think if you just talk, programmatic there's still like 15-20% of the money goes into the void of programmatic, 26% of it's still viewable. Those things still occur in digital. And then you've got the walled gardens of the different, of the different providers. Everybody is against you in transparency. So the myth at a board level is we want to measure everything. And you have to kind of say, well, that's not possible. Right. Without them thinking you're incompetent. So you have to say, well, let me tell you why, and here's the things we got to do. And as we know, like in marketing, brand building is still hugely valuable and is still always going to be a main driver, but you can't measure that immediately. Things like SEO are hugely important in any brand, especially any startup. Maybe not for bigger brands as much, but startups, SEO is important. But I can't give you a measurement for that for 2 years, but I'm going to ask you to invest X amount of money. And so they get like, well, I'll give you the money, but I need to know exactly what the return is. Like, well, you got to build something here. And so talking at that level, you have to kind of, there's a bit of a story, but it's they have to trust you and be able to, and then buy into that.
Right. Absolutely. I think trust is so critical, isn't it? With a CMO, with the CFO and the CEO. And I know you enjoy direct conversations with that team very regularly, whereas a lot of marketeers are a department where maybe the CMO attends the board meeting irregularly, not even every time, because too often the focus is on kind of operational and strategy that doesn't include marketing. So I think if you can build that trust, that makes a massive difference. So with your background, you obviously know a lot more about kind of what's real in digital technology and what to expect from agencies and from vendors and media owners. How do you go about probing kind of differently? Because I think that might help some marketeers. I find you get two types of marketers, either the natives to digital that understand it, and maybe some of those have had to build their understanding of the 5 Ps and kind of how to build brand. And then you get marketeers that have grown up in an FMCG type world with the playbook, kind of how to do things top down. And maybe they're a little bit frightened or anxious around technology and they don't know what questions to ask. So it feels like you're somewhere in between. So you've got a luxury that a lot of other people don't. So I'd love to, I'm sure the audience would love to hear, like, how do you probe to see whether there is actually truth in the stuff that's thrown at you?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's still tough no matter how much. You'll never know everything, you know. So I think surrounding yourself with people you trust is the most important thing. And then having conversations like, you know, my loyalty is to my customer. I want your loyalty to be to my customer as well. And let's solve this together and work on that. And I think it's a really tricky thing, because one of the old mantra of, you know, you don't have to be the, you know, you never want to be the smartest person in the room. In a certain case, you have to be very aware, and you do have to be really on top of what's happening, because you can get swept past. So whatever you do, if you're in a room and you don't understand, you have to go back, learn it, understand it. You can't, even with people, you know, because the truth of this whole thing is everything we do is subjective. Nobody knows the answer, and there's never a straight line. So building
there's no one single answer, is there? No.
Yeah, and that's the problem. And I think, you know, everyone's looking for that one single answer, which will never exist, because as soon as you solve that one single answer, it'll change, and then the solution will change. And the marketers that do the best are the ones that are ahead of it, making subjective, taking some risks. So I really think it's around surrounding yourself with even, you know, sales reps and technology providers and everybody that you truly trust. I mean, maybe it's a limited view, but I tend to not work with people I don't really know. And you know, being in the industry helps, because you meet, going to conferences and meeting as many people and building relationships with people for 2-3 years, right? I mean, Paul, you and I spoke for 4 years before we got to work together. And I think, I build relationships with people that I know and trust, and I know they've got my customers' best interest, not just me. And you know, there's more to it than that. And I don't know if that's the case.
Speak to you for the budget strings you hold. Yeah,
and I know that you get that. You can always tell when people have, they're trying to hit a quarterly, they're trying to hit a number, and you're important to that number, and you can feel the pressure that they put. And you know, something, the second from a sales perspective, if you're getting pressure, and I've been on that sales room side where, you know, your boss is like, hey, we gotta hit our quarterly number. We need to call, and you're calling clients going, hey, I'm gonna, whatever, you know, there's a discount if you sign by the 31st. And to me, instantly, I'm like, you know what? I'm cool. Like, I don't really, to me, that extra 20% discount is not worth the fact that I could screw this up. I'd rather pay the 20% and work with someone I trust and know we get it right, or closer to right, than take that discount. And I think a lot of people, and same with like creative, you know, we work with a lot of creative agencies, and when I put out a brief, and I did this recently, and I put out a brief that was fairly unreasonable in what I was asking to be done for the price I wanted to pay. But ultimately, I wanted to find a creative team that was willing to say, you know what, we can make this happen because we want to work with you, and we believe in this project. And then once they won the pitch, then it's like, okay, by the way, I was not totally tight on my budget. We can expand that, because more importantly is we get this right, as opposed to pay less for it. So I picked the ones that I did pick because I knew they weren't specifically there for the money. They were there because they believed in the project. The ones that said, you know what, I can't do this project because it's not enough money there, it tells me, you know, and they missed a fine line in the brief that said, give me at least one idea that fits budget, and all the other ones don't have to. And they just said, you know what, this is, you know, so to me, you have to be diligent. I have to be a really good steward of our company's finances. That's my job. I got to make sure that we spend as little money as possible on certain things, but we spend enough money to make the things that we do incredible. And that includes all the data and the creative and everything. So I think coming to that approach, and I prefer to work with vendors that are coming to that approach, as opposed to just a cost base. This is how much it is. Can you sign by this day? And we can get it moving, you know, so.
No, it makes a lot of sense, Brandon, and super interesting insight about the creative kind of process you ran. I quite often hear marketers say, look, we want to see more agility. We want to see proofs of concept rather than kind of throw everything with a big budget at one campaign. That's not the way the world works anymore. Yet I think, unfortunately, a lot of, whether they be agencies or vendors, a lot of them are still built for that model. And whilst the people might be able to deal with the agility and the flexibility, the commercial model is often the thing that get in the way, right? Because it's like, to your point, probably in a lot of creative agencies, like it has to be this minimum fee before we get out of bed. In a media agency, it's like, we want clients between this budget and this budget. I remember that's what we used to do at Havas. We're like, we want to spend between this and this, because it was all based on what you're going to deliver every quarter, and are you going to hit your revenue and EBITDA numbers, rather than, to your point, is this a client where you can actually go on a journey that is going to be super interesting and you're going to learn from and you're going to benefit over the long term, but maybe not in the first quarter?
Yeah, right. Yeah, and I think the cost per spend model in agencies, I don't understand that at all, and I don't think I would ever do that. I think there's a hard cost of people, and you pay for good people, and you pay for experience, and you pay for the actual act of doing for the agency is the easy part. It's the experience of working with past clients and the knowledge of the people and knowing you've got the best people on it.
Mm-hmm.
Those best people shouldn't be paid based on making recommendations to increase spend, right?
Right.
So I still don't understand that model, because I used to work in search, many years ago, and that was the model. It was like 20% spend. Of course, we're gonna, try to get your spend up, but that's may not be the best thing. And in my recent kind of transition into CMO, which has been like drinking information through a fire hose, it's been exciting, but man, just you're never prepared for what you need to know. But the information, like when you're in sales and you're selling one piece, you're selling one publisher, or you're selling one piece of tech, or you're selling one, you're selling your agency. To you, that's the most important thing in the world, and to the marketer, that's one 1/20th of what you have to focus on. Yeah. And so looking at that balance, going, well, hang on, everything needs to fit. And I remember, we lost pitches on a publisher deal, and they're like, well, we're gonna move that budget to radio, and we're just like, that's not even like comparing apples to apples. That's a complete different thing. But that's not what it's about for that marketer. The marketer's doing something completely different. And, right. And then, and I think sometimes from a sales standpoint, they get tunnel vision on, this is important for you, whether it is or it isn't. And I know, sales, you need to, but I think from a sales approach, taking that long-term approach to be like, I'll always be here for you when you need me, and I'm always going to do you the right way, and we're always going to do stuff together that'll be great. I think a long-term approach will pay dividends, as opposed
always
to
pays back in the long term. Yeah, no, I agree.
I've been guilty of both, but I think now I'm in this marketer shoes. Like, to me, trust and relationships with partners, experience of those partners. I'll never be the smartest guy in the room. I need to understand what's going on, but I really want people to sit in rooms who really get what they do at a very deep level, and they're not motivated by increasing my spend.
Right, and to your point, you don't want all of these siloed thinking. Either it's siloed commercial thinking or siloed, I only care about search or Google or Amazon or whatever it might be. And so how do you, like with those big platforms, any marketing business kind of, they're almost like utilities these days, aren't they? Google, Facebook, I mean, utilities without any regulation. But how do you think about like getting to truth and transparency there, right? Do you trust the Googles and Facebooks of this world, or do you worry that they own too much of the stack, like the buying stack, the sales stack, the analytics stack? I'm interested from your perspective. And I often look at it and think, okay, it feels like the easy decision to go down throw everything into a Google world because it's simple, but is it always going to give you the truth?
Yeah, I mean, at some point, I mean, the hard part is consumers are still there. I remember I met with the trading director at an agency many years ago, and he said, Google's 80% of our spend, and then all the other publishers are fighting over this small 20%. I was really agitated. I'm like, man, that's, we're fighting over this 20%, and it was almost impossible, because Facebook and Google already got the majority of it. The consumers are still there, attention's still there, and they have built incredible algorithmic attribution models. So if you put your budget into Facebook, they've built a model that's probably second to none, anyone else. I mean, yeah, there's other models, but they have the consumer and they have the attribution. So to some degree, I do trust it, but you got to watch their, what you're measuring too. Is it to clicks, to leads, and you really have to look on the back end of consumers and customers that you actually bring in. And that's a long-term project. The problem is you'll never get the answer you're asking me immediately. You'll get that answer, and you have to be diligent in your analysis of your customer data, and then understanding where those customers came from, and then make a decision in the long term, was I better off with this customer or not? And where do I find better customers? So And same with Google. So they give you this false sense of like this false positive of you drove more leads at a lower cost that turned into more customers. But then I think you got to look at that bigger window of what were those customers? Were they better customers, worse customers? And I think, and to me, that's the hardest part, is really solving that kind of the secondary part of, and if we really put our focus on customers and good customers and making them happy, how do we find good customers that will be happy? That kind of balance. I think that's probably one piece that we miss, especially if we're focused on DR or focused on, top funnel.
Right.
Is customer, like, what did that actually do for my business, as opposed to what did that do for my metrics? And like I said, Facebook and Google are very good at telling you metrics. You have to do your own analysis on the back end of, did that actually help your business?
Yeah, no, I hear you. And I guess what I'm hearing is you talk about essentially like the short term sometimes versus the long term. You can get a customer to sign up, but does that customer actually kind of regularly use your services, and is there value in that for you as a customer? Just having a sign up is not necessarily that important. And there's obviously been parts of the industry or media owners that have jumped up, which have exploited the fact that they know that some clients will focus kind of really on that early metric, and like affiliate marketing, maybe cost per lead, where it's like, we can get you this, but then you have to think, well, there's no one, to your point, there's no one single metric. You've got to be able to, when in a business like yours, is what does it cost me to acquire a customer, and what's my lifetime value of that customer, is really for any early stage business, isn't it? So how do you think about the balance of performance, lower funnel, kind of getting people in, and then kind of building the brand for what is still a fairly kind of new brand? Like, how do you think about that balance?
Yeah, I mean, I do a lot, as you know, Paul, I do a lot about music, and I look at music in a way. It's kind of an interesting kind of model, because you think about some of the biggest bands in the world are still the biggest bands that have been there from 20, 30 years ago. The bands that are still making the money have been around forever. Very rarely do you get a new band that comes out of nowhere and then is selling out arenas. I mean, you're still looking at, Aerosmith, AC/DC, Guns N' Roses, like these bands that have been around. So, and they're no different than a brand. And it's been harder and harder for bands to come out of nowhere and become a big brand. It's the same with brands. So ideally, everybody comes in, wants to build a big, famous, well-known brand. Of course, that's important. Of course, that will help you in everything. It's also really difficult. So you have to keep an eye on that, and you have to keep building it. Niche brands are probably more relevant. And so, smaller brands that can build out niche audiences and customer relationships is more likely than building a big, huge, famous brand with especially with budgets. But then also the data piece and the bottom funnel stuff. I think if I were starting a startup and thought about it, I think a lot of people focus, I mean, you go two ways. And I think the ones that get it right from a very stage one, and I think Ziglu did this right. I think they built a really cool brand, cool colors, cool positioning, how they're going to carve in the market. And that the reason I joined is because they actually did a lot of that thought process around that. And where they weren't is too much in that bottom funnel. So we thought we can move into the bottom funnel too. Right. We have to grow both and be a little more famous in the brand part. But if I were advice to anyone starting a serious company and they think about it, a lot of people think very short term, 2 years. But the reality is you'll probably be in that for 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years before you maybe get any sort of exit or bigger investment. So a lot of times you hear, small startup gets 100 million pounds in investment. It's like, well, small startups been around for 15 years, you just didn't know it, right?
Right. So, and isn't it interesting that the PR is always about the money raised as opposed to the success of the business, the revenue or the profitability hardly ever gets any press.
Yeah. I think that's a real problem, is like ignoring the news too, because talk about, we won't go down news, trust, and transparency at all. That's a whole nother podcast.
It is, isn't it? Right.
The other piece is, I think, and this is where that communication between a board and investors is really important, because everybody wants this hockey stick growth. They want to show this number of customers, onboarded customers that goes, like, wow, look at this. They're bringing in customers like crazy. And while everyone wants that, and there's some black swans that get that right away and grow, the reality is, brands are gonna have to build that. But I would really focus on that quality of customer at a smaller scale to make sure that my data of customer is right. So I can actually model an existing customer and say, this is who likes us, this is how they engage with us, and this is how we do more of that. if you kind of do this false metric of just throwing as many people as you can into this mix, you go, wow, look at our customer growth. We've got a million customers. I've seen companies do that. Like, well, we've got a million customers. And inside you go, I know you don't have a million customers, you know, but if you actually had a million really quality customers, you could model that and turn that into 20, 30 million. If you had 50,000 quality customers, you could turn that into 5 million. But if you had 50,000 and it was basically like sand just thrown in it was just like, there was no data there. You actually don't know, you're just going to keep growing a number that may or may not be good. So I think really focusing in these small, like quality of customer. I know this is the question a little bit, I'm going a little bit off on a tangent, but that quality of customer, the data you get and insights from that will help you grow exponentially in the right way. So it's not about hockey stick growth. It's about growth to the right person. So if I'm an investor, the question I ask is, great, you have 500,000 customers, a million customers.
Yeah.
I would drill into which ones are doing what you want to do, and then really analyzing that, because there's probably a bunch, that don't. So
I entirely agree with you. I remember listening to the Masters of Scale podcast, and I think that they tell the same story, right? That get 100 or 1,000 customers that love you, and then once you know what that profile looks like, then to your point, then focus on growing it. Don't just go out for big numbers straight off. I mean, Airbnb, I think they had very few customers to begin with, and they were personally going out and kind of actually doing the job themselves as the founders. And then one day they were like, okay, we now know who that customer is, what our proposition is, what our go-to-market is, because the market's told us, the customer has told us, and then they go from there. So yeah, I entirely agree with you.
Yeah, the Airbnb is it's one of the great models of marketing. Even Uber early stages, until they moved, they had to grow at massive scale and probably change direction. But I think Airbnb is interesting because they focused on customer, they understood customer, and they found a niche, they found a problem, they found a niche, and then the customers became their referral mechanisms. They created that, and their brand was less important as their referral and their customer base. But the customers grew. The customers
built the brand later, actually, didn't they?
All of a sudden, I bet you everyone we talked to, how'd you hear about Airbnb? Is like, someone told me about it. Like you were booking a hotel and someone said, why don't you just use Airbnb? So it was a really interesting way. And Uber too. Uber kind of became just Uber instead of take a taxi. So I think that focus on customer and growth and getting that part right, and then making a product that they love will grow, and then your brand grows with it. So I think all that stuff's important. I think a lot of people miss that, where they just go massive customer growth.
When you can create that exciting word of mouth and advocacy, it almost means that you can reduce the investment in brand, because you just start to build that network effect very quickly, don't you? But I'm sure there's 100,000 examples, and maybe only 5 or 10 of them that have done it brilliantly.
We're going down a wormhole we didn't expect, but this is the truth of it. And building, so that's the problem. Go back to like what a marketer is, that brand piece is super important, because if you have a good brand, obviously your bottom funnel costs are going to be, your cost per acquisition is going to be a lot less. Right. You're also going to have customers that love you, and they're going to tell more people, so the brand, and then you want your customers to have a sense of belonging with your brand. They feel that attachment, like, hey, these are my people. We all like to, this is, they stand for what we stand for. So that brand is hugely important. The bottom funnel is hugely important. Understanding each one of those in isolation, and then orchestrating it all together. So bringing bottom funnel, bringing brand, bringing middle funnel, bringing referrals, bringing customer information, bringing all of that, orchestrating it together is when you work to that kind of holy grail. Yeah. But it's really hard to do, because I think too many marketers kind of focus on one or the other, or maybe two, and then they forget about 2 or 3 things. And and I'm also included. It's just a matter of juggling all those balls to work towards.
Right, and you need to hold your nerve, and you need to be able to kind of build trust with others to hold their nerve, rather than review everything every 2 days or every week, because some things don't happen in a week in marketing, right? Consumer behavior doesn't always shift that quickly.
Trusting your gut. I always say the average CMO lasts 18 months. So my internal mantra is, I'm going to really build a nice foundation for the next person, because they're going to join and go, after 18 months, wow, he really did all the right things. This is great. And then that person's going to look amazing. So I kind of think like, it's like passing the torch. I'll do the right things, and then you'll come in and keep it going. But that's not always the case. It's probably that's maybe a cynical approach to it. Maybe they'll keep.
No, I like it. No, I think it's a good way of thinking about it. And then you can always be there another 18 and go, I beat my target. How do you think about, how do you build the culture in your marketing team and with your kind of agencies and other providers? Like, What's your style of getting everyone to bring truth and kind of collaborate and kind of be scrappy and smart, like some of the things you've talked about?
Yeah, one of the greatest, I love, one of the greatest motivational speeches I saw was David Bell. I think he was one of the original Mad Men. I don't know if you ever met him in New York.
Yeah, I didn't, but I know him. Yeah,
he was kind of Tim Armstrong at AOL's right hand, like guru. And even Tim put an office in the corner for David just to sit there, and people could just kind of walk in and out and just ask him questions. And he's the most, at that time, I think he was in his 70s. He's the most stylish dresser. I mean, he just looked like an advertising guy, but you could ask him anything. And he said, always manage people with kite strings, let them fly, let them do what they want. And that always stuck to me. It's just manage with kite strings. That's nice. and help them and support them. So for me, I'm definitely not a micromanager. I'll say, here's our mantra. Here's how we stand. We lead our marketing with trust and transparency always. We never overpromise to customers. We never misinform. We always take the high road. And you asked earlier about regulation. We always, even with the regulation, like the new regulation rules in a very regulated industry, it doesn't affect us because we want people to come in eyes wide open into a very complex world. So we will never kind of say, hey, you're going to make tons of money. It's like, look, this is a risk. You get, so we always lead with this kind of trust and transparency at the foremost, because we want to be able to look our customers in the eye and say, what we told you is what we do and what we meant,
That's refreshing.
And so making sure that my marketing team understands that. And then I kind of divide and conquer, say, look, own this, go. And then as long as they have that same philosophy and ethos, and then they come back for support, so I'll kind of lay out strategy. We're going this direction, and then get them to go. So it really is managing by kite strings and let them fly. And, I always hire people better than you and make sure that they can do that stuff. So
good advice. And listening to you, I'm sure lots of people are thinking Brandon's got everything together. He's got so much experience. He can look at it from different angles, but everyone's always working on something themselves, like trying to improve and better themselves. So I'd love if you wouldn't mind sharing like some of the things you're working on.
Yeah, we got it all together. I'll say there's many a times just staring at a blank wall going, oh man, okay, what do we do? Look, I've always taken the approach of, I don't know if it's the Japanese principle of kanai, constant and never ending improvement. Like, and I took every job I took. I don't have, if you look at my career, it was like 2 years here, 2 years there. And I genuinely went there to learn as much as I could. And when I felt like I learned what they did, I'd go and learn something else. So my mom always says, you're just jumping jobs so much. I'm like, yeah, but think it's like a master's in education. Think of the learning. And she's like, the gold watch of staying at somewhere is non-existent. So I've always taken the approach of kind of being like, I want to learn as much as I can. I feel like I've got a good I'm never the best, but like the bottom funnel stuff, SEO, the search, the programmatic stuff, I feel like I can hold my own and talk in those conversations. The data target, the attribution, all that stuff. I feel like on the creative side, which is always very subjective, creative is one of those, like mentally, internally, you always second guess how you approach creative, and you have 5 people in a room and you have 5 ideas and no one will like the idea. Yeah. and in this role, you just have to say, you know what, my gut says this, and we're going to go that direction. So that's the hard part. And then that middle funnel, I know I'm talking a good game about customers and research and all that stuff, and I need to get better at that stuff. I mean, so I love this business because there's always something new. I mean, Google and Facebook make sure they keep us on our toes and changing things constantly. But I think for me, it's just approaching every single thing. If I don't know something, I'll spend the weekend just studying, reading, and trying to understand it because I need to know it rather than expect people to know it. So for me, I'm constantly feel like the information, like it's just a tidal wave and I've got to be able to surf it. And I always use that surfing analogy, and like surfing is just, I'm not a great surfer by any, I'm a bit of a surfing kook, but it is about being able to adapt and understand, but know as much as I can. And I never feel like I know it all, but I'm on a quest to know it all. And my tombstone's going to say, he died trying, or he did it. I don't know which one yet.
Probably he did it because he kept trying and kept going down different angles, right? So I think you've maybe just done it, but my last question is there any final advice? You may just have given it actually in that question, but is there anything else that you would advise listeners to kind of really keep kind of front of mind?
Yeah, I think it's never ever stop learning, right? Like that's the piece is never rest on your laurels and think you know it all, because I guarantee you there's stuff you don't know, and there's so many things and always be honest about people, what you know and what you don't know. And I think as I grew in my career, accepting what I'm good at and what I'm bad at was probably, like, rather than pretending I'm good at the stuff I'm bad at, you know, and I think, and younger in your career, you realize like, I want to be everything to everyone. I want to be great. And as you get older, you're like, I'm really good at this, but I'm really not good at this. And then finding people that can do the stuff that you're not good at, but being honest about it and then trying to get better. So I think there's never a stage in your career where you're too old to learn. Like it's constantly. And I think the second I stop wanting to learn, I think I should just go off to pasture and call it a day. But right now I thrive on that and the excitement of learning. And I just love, you know, and always be on that hunt. I want to solve these things like transparency and attribution. And I want to make our customers happy. So, and these are things that are really, really tough goals, but never give up and there's no clear path to it, you know?
Nice. Well, I think you actually nicely circled back to where we started, which is actually, if you're constantly learning and being curious and getting in touch with new things, then you're going to be much better equipped to be able to see where there maybe isn't the truth or transparency. And you've given us some great kind of ways to think about how to balance kind of different aspects of marketing and how to think about building a business. So it's been great, Brandon. Thank you so much for making the time.
Yeah, we could do this for days, I think. But yeah, no, I appreciate it.
I'm sure we could carry on and on, but I try to keep it like something that people can listen to if people do commute anymore. I mean, I guess people do on certain days of the week, maybe not every day anymore.
Yeah, all the stuff you're involved in. I know you do the CMO sessions and you work with the couple festival, the MAD festival. Those are always the best stuff because I think you take an approach of let's really get to it and talk about it rather than let's you know BS our way around. And I always find the stuff you do is probably the most useful for me. I learn more through your kind of content than I do most places. So thanks for that.
That's where I'm very grateful for that, Brandon. Thank you, and thanks for making the time. I'm sure the listeners will learn a lot from you too. So,
cool.
Over and out.